Hello, and welcome to our time here together. We've just celebrated Easter, and you may or may not have read the story of Jesus' resurrection from John's Gospel. In John's Gospel, Peter and the beloved disciple rush to the tomb when Mary says that she can't find the body. She doesn't know where they have taken it or who has rolled the stone away. Peter and John come to the tomb and they see the linen cloth lying in the tomb. They see the stone has been rolled away, but they don't see any angels and they don't see Jesus. They see the empty tomb and they leave with a sense that they understand that God is doing something. They're not exactly sure what this is, but they do remember Jesus saying something about death not being able to hold him back and God having a greater plan. Mary, on the other hand, comes to the tomb after Peter and John have looked inside, and she sees two angels. And they ask her, why is she so distressed? And then she turns around outside and she sees someone she thinks is the gardener. And when he says to her, Mary, she recognizes that it is Jesus. So why do Peter and John not see the angels? And why don't they see the risen Jesus? And yet they are able to believe. In seeing the empty tomb and the linen cloth, they don't lose all faith. I want to reflect today a little bit on what happens when emptiness is all that we see. So what happens when we are like Peter and John? We live in a world in which we want answers all the time. And we live in a world in which there is such a wealth of information around us and at our fingertips through our phones that we want answers, we want clarity. We want to know the next step all the time. And we really struggle when our answer is emptiness, as in the empty tomb. And I think that the invitation from Peter and John for us is that sometimes the most profound answer is in the emptiness. Because there was nothing in the tomb, because Jesus was not there, they didn't need to see the angels. They didn't need to see the risen Christ. They were able to see that emptiness and know that God was at work. God was doing something. They didn't fully understand what it was, but they knew that God was at work. Perhaps in his heart of heart, John had some sort of belief that Jesus had risen again. For Peter, it was probably a case of being totally discombobulated and not really knowing what had happened. His full understanding is going to come a minute later. Peter and John both come to the empty tomb, and they have somewhat different experiences. John has some kind of inkling that Jesus has possibly risen again. For Peter, he is a lot less sure, but they both go back to the disciples and they say that God is at work. Something is happening. Jesus is no longer in the tomb. So the invitation for us is, when we are faced with emptiness, like the empty tomb, are we able to be like John and Peter and recognize that God is at work, that the emptiness is often the very answer, is the very symbol, is the very tangible, physical reality that God is working? Now, that's very difficult to really step into, because sometimes the emptiness means it's a job we didn't get. The emptiness might mean a loved one has passed away. But in these different places of emptiness, of the empty tomb, where there is nothing, we don't encounter angels, we don't see Jesus, we just see the emptiness. That for many of us is often God's invitation for us to recognize that God is at work in our lives, and God's answer that will take us to the next step of our journey is that we need to be like Peter and John and be able to hold the emptiness of the tomb, the emptiness of not getting a job, the emptiness of a relationship falling apart. So I hope that this gives you something to think with and to pray with, that if you are in a space of emptiness, where you have stepped into the empty tomb and there is nothing there, not to feel as though God has abandoned you or that you can't hear or see God, but rather that this is God's answer for you at the moment, that this place of emptiness will lead on to the next blessing. But you have to first be in the place of emptiness before you can recognize the blessing that is to come. Amen.